what does nature
Hmm.
mean to you? And the kind of second half of that is what are your earliest memories of that?
I think everyone should be asked that question, you know, because so many people, um, you know, I know that. So, E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, he studied ants and other critters. He said that there's something deep in our genetics that require we have connection to nature. And I believe that. I believe that deeply because I grew up in projects in Northeast LA and had no connection to nature. Then one day I went across the street to a place that they were clearing for a dump, and I saw a lizard, and I'd never seen a lizard before. I was 7 years old. I'd never seen a lizard before. And then I was walking around in these weeds, and there's a tree, and I just felt like, wow, I really must be in the wilderness. You know, if you think about it now, you know, I was nowhere but across the street where they were clearing land for a dump. But it's all relative. Nature is all relative. But my point is that it struck something deep inside of me to say, oh, this is nice. I need to be part of this, whatever it is. And so I had this really strong sense of wonder and curiosity, as most kids do, but we tend to squash it. The formal educational process tends to squash it because we want to categorize and we want to put everything in its right place and we really want to name everything instead of really allowing kids to look at something and just have the sort of this deep questioning, wondering that goes on inside of you naturally. Nature is where we are now, you know. Although it's been impacted, nature is deep in the jungles in Belize, and nature is, you know, the Arctic refuge, and nature is can be a small urban park where there's plants and animals, and they're allowed to be just what they can be in the smallest plot or the largest biopreserve, like in the Yucatan. But nature is, for me, is to be away from sort of the trappings of civilization and the urban concrete masses. And you can do that right in the middle of a city, or it can be deep, deep wilderness, like some trips that I've taken. Something deep in our genetics has to be connected to the natural world. And that's what nature is when you can connect to that natural world in some way, shape, or form. That's what nature is to me.
The next question is how does that sort of segue into the work you're doing now? So, uh, maybe that's OBA or whatever, however you see the work you're doing now.
So the work that I see that I'm doing now is twofold. One is to protect the natural resources that we have, and the other one is to make sure that we broaden the base of the conservation and environmental movement by encouraging those that part of American demographic that has historically been absent. We encourage them to join the party, and the party in this case is our natural resources, and knowing that we're not just proselytizing somebody and saying this is a good thing for you to enjoy because it's the right thing to do, but by having them join under their own volition and their own power by recognizing the beauty and the value of open spaces and natural places. It's about connecting people where they are and who they are into an open space and letting them see the value on their own. It might happen in a day, it might happen in 10 years, but the connection has to come naturally through who they are. And OBA, the work that I currently do, I've obviously done other things. I was a ranger for the National Park Service, I was a director of an environmental department, I was an ecologist for the Army Corps of Engineers, I was even an environmental scientist for a while. But the work that I currently do through OBA is about making sure that everybody has access to some form of nature.
This next one's about community and how you see the work that you do serving the community And also, how does the community support the work that you do? What does that look like for you?
So there's I move in and out of two communities. The one community that I move in and out of is the environmental conservation community, which is typically um, middle class, lower middle class whites, because it is a sort of a generational thing that comes up. I mean, you could be brought up on a farm in Indiana and connect to nature and become a conservationist through that, or you can be, your parents could have joined the Audubon Society and you become a bird watcher and connect to nature through that. But typically, the environmental and conservation movement has not been a big part of low-income communities of color, and that's the second community that I work in and out of. I grew up in a low-income community of color, and I see a perfect connection between the connection between nature and these low-income communities of color and the typical or the classical environmental conservation community. I am supported by them because, by and large, the uh, typical demographic within the environmental and conservation community, they uh, tend to be very focused in whatever their craft is and their field is, but also focus on preserving the environment. But they also tend to be very liberal in their relations, and they want to see a bigger community come in, and they understand the necessity to have those folks who have not typically been in nature to come into nature. And if you notice in the last 10 years, and I've been in the environmental field for 45 years, in the last 10 years, it's been a huge cry to integrate and bring in another demographic and to make sure that all kids, especially urban kids of color, are connected to nature. And so it is a very welcoming community and a very helpful community.
So that leads right into the next question, which is about how you see access and equity in the work that you do. What does that mean in the context that you're part of, and how does that realized or not?
Access and equity and how it's realized, at least for the demographic and the kids that I work with, is easily accessed through grassroots organizations and grassroots people who are doing the work locally. One is because they understand their community, and two is because they really want to build a bigger community around, um, you know, making sure that everyone's welcome. And I think the third thing is that they recognize the need to have more disadvantaged, under-resourced, disenfranchised communities involved in the environmental and conservation movement. So um, I can go into a meeting and talk about what I do, and most people at the grassroots level, the community level, the neighborhood level say, "That's wonderful. I want to join forces. Tell me how to do it." And just like some of the people that you and I were talking about today, we're all sort of on the same page about how to make this happen. Now, as you move further away from the grassroots level, let's say we go to the agency level. Let's talk about the Bureau of Land Management, talk about the Park Service, talk about the Forest Service. Then it becomes a bit more problematic because it requires an outdoor pedigree, a certain outdoor pedigree, to move into those upper echelons of land management and conservation. And consequently, that's why those agencies still are predominantly run by white males. And if you don't have the right pedigree and white too, white pedigree, you're not going to move into those echelons. You may be an anomaly. You may enter in like I was able to do because I had a certain skill set. In fact, when I got hired as a regional manager for the National Park Service, I asked them, why did you guys pick me? I don't have any National Park Service previous history of working with the Park Service. They said, because you had the sweetest set of skills that we've come across in terms of my other work with the Army Corps of Engineers as being a director of an environmental department and working at the grassroots level to bring in these communities that were traditionally underserved. But When you stay at an agency level, or even conservancies, conservancies tend to be pretty much those folks that have had, traditionally have had access to the outdoors and kind of know the arena. They can speak the language. They know who to go to get things done. They know that using the legal system and the political system as a way to make things happen. Underserved groups and disenfranchised groups of color have not had access to that and don't understand it. So they haven't developed the pedigree to move in the upper echelons of the environmental and conservation movement. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do at OBA is say, here's how you move around, here's how you navigate this field. So at the grassroots level, I think it's pretty easy to get involved in the environmental arena. At an agency or a conservancy or a upper level, it's really difficult. And then as you get higher up, it becomes more and more difficult unless you've been in the field. And you are going to be an anomaly, like the head of the EPA right now or the head of the Department of Interior. One's an African American, one's a Native American. They are anomalies. You know, they're not representing what's really happening in those agencies, but they represent what America wants to see happen. And so they've moved up the ranks, and now at the cabinet level and the administrative level and the presidency, they say, hey, we've got to bring these people in. We recognize there's a deficit. And so a deficit by not having people of color in these areas. So they were, put there for a good reason.
And this, the question is, how do you see, what hope do you see in the near future? And this could be your personal life about OBA, zoom way out globally, and then what challenges and what strategies do you see in getting there and realizing that hope?
I'm really hopeful for the near future, and hope isn't something that's conjured up just by myself. I can't really say, I created this hope because I want it. I want to be hopeful. Hope traditionally has some drivers, some little things that push on you, and what has driven my hope is the fact that there are people like you and other people that are not traditional people that are doing the outreach into low-income communities of color and are recognizing, hey, we've really got to make this, better, more available to a broader body of people. And you may have been doing this your entire life, but there are a lot of people that are just coming on and seeing that this is real necessary to engage a broader audience and getting young urban kids of color interested in the environment. Some of it may be selfish because we want this to stay this way, and some of it may be out of an understanding that if we don't franchise everybody, that next generation are going to be the ones that vote to keep this like this or don't vote to keep this like this, and we need to make sure that they are connected and understand the value of this.
I wonder if you could just talk about some of those, this, I guess strategies is the word I'm using for how you personally may have sorted this out in your own life, what this looks like through OBA as an organization and how it moves forward to achieve these things. In the face of a lot of challenges. I mean, there are challenges out there, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these paths that we started out talking about are not default paths. There's not a path laid out
Right.
before you that's clear and supported. And how do you find that? How do you find that support? How do you navigate a path that might not be well defined?
I think where we are is, and where we're trying to go is do three things with young people, especially young people of color, and that doesn't require the space to navigate anywhere outside of where we're working. And I think it's going to take everybody's little slice of genius to figure out how that works. Our job is to work with these people and develop three things. As a change of their mindset is one thing, is change their approach to learning, right? And give them some self-mastery skills. After you get them sort of thinking in a way that they understand the role that they can play, I think that's the time to bring them to the table and say, look, here's a path that we're thinking about going on. We need your input. We value what you have to say. You see things differently, and we need for you to help us craft the solution to the navigating this particular path. I don't think it should come from us as, you know, sort of the sage on the stage or the instructor. I think we should facilitate a new dialogue that involves voices that understand the problem at a different level and see it differently, of navigating these paths, especially how do we engage a broader audience and get them out there into the environmental world. And the other thing is, there are some things that just absolutely work all the time, and one of them is just getting young people connected to nature by having them spend time outdoors. That has never failed. In the 60 years that OBA has been around, I can't remember any kid coming back to me and saying, you know, that was the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. I never want to do it again. I have had kids say, I don't think I want to do that again. I don't want to camp for 12 days, or I don't want to do that. But they've never said this is the worst thing. They've always said, I learned something about myself and I've learned something about the world, but this is not my cup of tea. And that's cool. I mean, that's the way the world works, right? But it is more about getting folks connected. You cannot expect anyone to protect anything or do anything around conservation if they haven't experienced it and been out there doing it, you know. It's like asking someone to describe the taste of pizza to you. They never had a bite of pizza. You just got to get them to experience it first and then see what they think about it. So navigating those really rough roads, given where we are in these times, especially politically, is going to really take, as I said earlier, the slice of genius that comes from everybody, and bringing these folks to the table and helping us craft a new pathway to where we want to go.
So one of the things we didn't cover, which is right in there,
Yeah.
is specifically what we did at the library, and how that team was able to show up and do that work, and how that functions through OBA.
Yeah. So one of the things that OBA does is, you know, it's really important for young people to understand what they're doing and the impact of what they're doing, why it matters. It brings purpose and value to whatever it is. And so we were keen on working with you guys and doing this native plant garden because they would come to learn the difference between a native and a non-native and understand why that's important. But also, the kids that work there all come from the community, and they see Bob Lucas, they see the library every day. And so if they're going to see it every day, they're going to have a bit of, you know, it really does franchise young people when something in their community has been beautified and they were part of that process. And so that's the buy-in fact, and that's the information fact that, oh, we're planting native plants, and native plants are good because they provide habitat, or they provide food, or they provide space for other animals and plants to survive, and they're the right kind of plant for this type of environment, and they can survive with the amount of moisture and water that comes in on the Mediterranean climate. But whatever it is, it's a learning experience for the kids, and learning expands, you know, their ability to navigate their community actually even better, because they can drive by and say, Mom, I planted all those plants right there. Yeah. And Mom says, well, what is that place? Well, that's the Bob Lucas Library. Oh, it is? I didn't know that was a library. I've been going by here for 25 years and didn't know it was a library. For instance, I've been in this area since 1963. I had never been in the Bob Lucas until I came to see our kids there. So I walked in there and said, wow, this is kind of cool. So anyway, it opens up a lot of doors by engaging the community and the kids, especially who traditionally do not know how to open doors. Are You're giving them a handle on the doorknob by saying, "Hey, come and work with us in your community."
Is there anything else you want to add? Anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about?
I want to talk about some of the gang violence that's going on in Northwest Altadena and Pasadena that a lot of people are sort of buffered from and sheltered from in the gang intervention crew that's currently building a trail. So there is a trail that was adjudicated when Lavinia came in 20-something years ago, 25, 30 years ago, I don't know. And as part of the mitigation for them taking out land, they had to build a trail for the public. The county assumed the control of the trail process. The property next to Lavinia was purchased by the Mountains Restoration Conservation Authority to hold in perpetuity in its natural state. So, and then MRCA knows about us, OBA being a local group and working with a disadvantaged population. They contracted us to build the trail, and then since we've started building the trail, some local residents have come out and really complained about what's going on. We're building it to specs, to the county specs, but they've complained about, well, what are those people doing down there? They don't know what they're doing. Somebody came by and said, you guys look like a chain gang. Another biologist said, you know, you need a certified biologist to do that work. And just I think it has a whole lot to do with the fact that that crew is all of color, that they just don't feel comfortable. They're used to maybe seeing an all-white crew. I don't know, but they don't feel comfortable, and they need to come in and talk with me. First of all, I'm a certified and still registered biologist. Second, I have a couple of degrees in environmental science. I taught it at the college level. I know my plants, and I'm following the specs that the county is, and I'm training the crew to do that. And I want some of the folks to know that these people that are building the crew and some of the biologists and conservationists and other folks, that these people are trained, and while they may have had a series of disadvantage, they are just as much an environmentalist as we are, the two of us sitting here and anybody else. It's dormant, it's inside of them, and once they understand, you know, the role that they can play and what they're doing and how right it is, they typically become converts. And once you get converts like that working in our arena, they are the most adamant about environmental issues and preserving things. It takes a while, and it takes the right touch and the right type of curriculum, and I'm speaking from an informal sense when I say curriculum. But once you get them working, they are going to be your biggest advocates. And also they become something called sneezers. Sneezers are people that go into the community, because most of us don't have access into the gang community or into the African American community the way they do. And they will say, look, I worked on this crew for 8 months and here's what I did. Oh, it's right up here, by the way. And it was the best experience I ever had. And so it's really critical that we support this type of work that's going on. The city is giving us some support, and I'm getting money from the Mountains Restoration Conservation Authority, but we locally must support this type of work and not deter them by saying, you know, you're digging too close to that root. Instead say, hey, let me come in and run a workshop on native plants and teach you what's going on about that, instead of saying you don't know what you're doing because you're doing it wrong. You know, they just need to be learned and taught how to do it right, and then they become part of the process that's doing the right work, and not just somebody's doing the work and people are telling them you're doing it wrong. That's